You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
Off to a killer start.
Yeah, dude.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Brian's going to be so proud of us. Fantastic.
So basically what Morgan was probably saying is welcome to Flipping the Birds. We're going to talk about offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators today. Another thing he was probably saying was, hi, Zach, how are you doing today? How was your weekend? I wasn't here last week, so how was your last week even?
I'm doing great, Eric, and of course Morgan as well, who originally, I guess, said that on mute. But no, it's a good time all the way around. We're right in the middle of Sixers West Coast trip, so we have two back-to-back 10 o'clock start times. So things on the basketball front are going great. Depending on who you ask, things on the Eagles front might be going one way or another, depending on how you feel about these coordinators. But we got a lot to talk about. So, welcome, Morgan. How we working out now?
I thought I went well. I had it nailed. You know, for some reason the video, like when I get the video right, when I get the intro right, the speech doesn't work. So I can't win here. You know, if Brian's watching, man, I apologize. I just can't do it justice. I don't know what it is. You gotta come back.
Can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Got it. Yep.
Yeah, fair enough. You know, they teach us. They don't teach us this stuff in school.
I just assumed everything you were going to say, and I think it worked well. So
I blanked on the number of the episode at first, but then I got it.
That's why I left that blank too.
188, man. 188. We're near, or 198, I think. 198 something. We're near 200, which is awesome.
Counting?
Thank you for everyone that stuck around all these episodes. The one thing I will say is usually we're not doing podcasts right now. Like usually we're after the season, we take a break. I guess Brian didn't get the memo. Who knows? No, I'm just kidding. He's got family stuff, but he'll be back. Really excited to kind of hit this new kind of era of Philly football and PSN flipping the bird stuff, off season stuff. Like everything kind of changes, like the leaves change in color, and we get to do podcasts now and actually talk about it. So we're really excited. We'll try and keep these podcasts in the off season a little shorter, give you little tidbits of what we're hearing and kind of focus on obviously leading up to the draft. Luckily, we do have a lot of changes, like Zach mentioned, in terms of the coaching staff that we can talk about as well. A great place to kick it off. Obviously, the big headlines, new OC, new DC in town, Vic Fangio, the DC, the guy they tried to get last year, decided to take, a year in Miami, a little hiatus before coming home to Pennsylvania. Now with the Eagles. And then on the offensive side of the ball, Kellen Moore. I'm saying Kellen for Eric's sake because I know that the first name and Matt Moore, he's getting those confused. So Kellen Moore, I'll keep saying it. But two new coordinators. On the defensive side, probably not a whole bunch of changes schematically, but probably a lot of changes and hopefully a lot of changes in terms of performance, just more experience on the offensive side of the ball. Couldn't be more different in terms of hopefully the scheme we're going to see. How are you guys feeling about the changes? Well, which coordinator are you more excited about? And how do you feel about kind of the scheme going forward?
I think I'm more excited for Kellen Moore. So I want to get that right real quick. Kellen Moore, just because I know what the offensive personnel is in Philly. And I think with a more experienced, obviously, coordinator, that could be just inherently dangerous. I don't think there's too much you have to change about the offense to keep that dangerous. You obviously, you want to keep as much protection there on the offensive line, but I think all the skill stuff around that doesn't need too much of a change outside of probably, and something better than Quez. I think that's really the big change that you're going for in offense. Defense, the reason why I'm not as I guess pumped, and I do like Vic, a lot better than what we had anywhere last year. So we'll start with that. But and Desai was a disciple of Vic. But the thing is, even if Vic is calling his defense, do we have the personnel to run his defense? So I think that still has to come first, and it will, because he's gonna have some impression over the offseason. But until that part is answered, I can't get too excited because I still know it's basically the same defenses.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're not going to know much more about the defense until we go through the draft and free agency. The offense is, for the most part, a little bit more set. But for me, I kind of have to, not that I'm not excited about Kellen Moore. I think there's definitely some reasons to be a little, I don't want to say apprehensive, but a little bit. Let's see the on-field production before we get carried away with Kellen Moore. There's obviously been some good strides he's made. There's been room for criticism as well, but with Vic Fangio, which that's true for any coordinator, but with Vic Fangio, there's an attitude change as well. With the offense, Eric said that, I know the personnel, I kind of know what it is, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm less excited for it. I feel as though any coordinator kind of worth their weight will be able to turn that around. Maybe not into a top three offense in the league, but much closer to what they looked like 2 seasons ago now. The defense, we're looking at nearly a complete transformation. And that's something where I think that Fangio's attitude, which has gotten him a little bit in trouble at times, is definitely going to be sorely needed and kind of a breath of fresh air in a sense. And I'm excited to see what some of these young guys can do in a Vic Fangio defense, thinking specifically of Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. So compound that with some of the additions I expected them to make. I think the defense is going to be pretty exciting come next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing on both fronts is the Eagles went from having, a combined 0 years of coordinating experience to what is over 25 at this point. So it just felt like, I mean, and we talked about it all season, that experiences from the top is really what was lacking from this team. And I think that if you decide, which the Eagles did decide to keep Sirianni, is like that's what he needed to support him, is that experience. And not only are they getting that with the coordinators, which we'll continue that conversation, but also with some of the positional coaches. They've made 2 hirings there as well. It just seems like, regardless of how you feel about the scheme itself, Howie Roseman and Jeff Lurie made the hirings they needed to make. I think that if at this point those 2 coordinators don't work out, the whole coaching tree needs to kind of come down. You need to kind of start over. Like it just seems like this is the be all end all. It's like, hey, listen, if we get you these experienced coordinators and it still doesn't work, Eric mentioned personnel, and I think that that's a fair point as well, especially on the defensive side. On the offensive side as well, we're not sure what happens yet. We had in the comments there a comment about Jason Kelsey. That makes a huge difference. But overall, just way more experience in the coaching staff. And I think the biggest thing realistically is the real attention to getting guys that not only have experience, but are great developers. I think the Eagles realize that they are young and not getting any older anytime soon. I think a lot of those older guys on the roster clearly are on the way out, whether it's by their own decision or the front office's decision. But they need someone who can develop talent. And I think that that's what they brought Sirianni in to do. And hopefully these coaches with more experience allow him to do a bit more of that, as well as contributing to that themselves. But again, we'll talk about that more with the positional coaches as well, because I think that they fit into that as well. But let's kind of dive a bit more into each coordinator. Let's start with the offense. A big change, realistically, schematically, kind of going from Brian Johnson's offense, I guess, if you're going to call it that, to an actual scheme now. The biggest couple of things that I'll mention, one, pre-snap motion. Kellen Moore's a big pre-snap motion guy. 2, a hurry-up offense. He was one of the most proficient hurry-up offense coordinators, if that's how you phrase that, over the last couple of years. The trade-off being, from what I've seen, just a little less schematically inclined to the run game, right? So the pass game should get a huge boost. Be interesting to see how they handle that run game. Jeff Stoutland sticking around as the offensive line and run game coordinator should help. But how are you guys feeling about bringing in the new scheme and how it will affect the roster?
I mean, if it's anything, and again, we've talked about how he was the coordinator for Dallas. I think that our offense is the perfect offense. If he can run something similar that he did in Dallas, and he was fluid with it there. I mean, we know this. We played them twice. We always look at them as the competition in our division for the most part. And when they had Zeke as their featured back, even Pollard, it worked. And I don't know how long he was coordinating with Pollard as his back. I don't know if he did it for 1 year, and then that's when he moved over to Los Angeles after. But what I will say is, even going back to when the Cowboys had Zeke there, and it was Zeke and Dak, and you had whatever Dez, even whoever Gallup, whoever was the breakout receiver that they had. Well, you have two of those guys. You have Dallas has never been short of using their tight ends, and we have one of those. Goddard's fantastic. Like, he has the weapons. He's used to having these weapons. How is he going to utilize Swift is my big question, because we have a murderer's row, it seemed like, of running backs that we could have used at any time, but they were unused last season. So if that changes, then we can get excited about the offense. But I'm already excited about what he has to offer, because he's prepared to offer an offense that I've seen in action before. And I think we all knew Brian Johnson was not prepared to bring any offense, because we've never seen it before, and we didn't see it really all season either.
Yeah, I mean, so it's curious, and this is where, before, when I was speaking about the kind of excitement versus not excitement some people are having with Kellen Moore, you take a look at the production that he's had at some of these past stops, and with Dallas, obviously that initially was huge, and he was one of the biggest names around the league for a time, one of the hottest young coaching candidate names. Uh, he has been the coordinator for two of the most frustrating quarterbacks in the NFL, in Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. And what I mean by that is guys who cannot seem to live up to the moment. Uh, in Jalen Hurts, they don't have that problem. Obviously, Hurts is coming off of a rough year last year, but we've seen Hurts excel in those moments. I mean,
Right.
he had an incredible game in the Super Bowl just the year before last. So you have a quarterback who can actually get you there if not only are you going to help get him there, but if he respects you enough to accept your plan, which was part of the issue that they had last year. I'm not necessarily worried about that type of situation repeating itself. The kind of how Dak Prescott was only getting a lot of his stats from stat padding late in games. I'm not worried about that from Kellen Moore next year. The terrible collapse of the Chargers offense, I'm not worried about that for Philadelphia as much next year, because not only is their uh, personnel better than Las Vegas, or not Las Vegas, Los Angeles's. On top of that, and this is going to sound a little crazy right now in Philadelphia. It just shows how the season was for the Chargers. I still have more faith in Nick Sirianni than I ever did in Brandon Staley, and it's going to be Kellen Moore who's going to be calling the offense, obviously, but just the person in that position of the head coach. And I understand there's been a lot made of people didn't like Sirianni's answer at the press conference and everything such as that. What is he actually doing? There is something to be said about the leader of men, which I think is still Nick Sirianni's role. And you can argue that you would prefer to have your head coach be the play caller, and I think you'd have a lot of good points in that argument. But even still in the situation, Nick Sirianni is going to play an integral role into how this team succeeds next year. So having effectively swapping out Brandon Staley for Nick Sirianni, I think that's also going to help Kellen Moore in that regard as well. So the big difference, obviously, and Morgan, I think that you touched on this a little bit, is the increase in movement, pre-snap movement between none. Like, if you could have negative movement in an offense, that's what the Philadelphia Eagles had last year,
Right.
versus someone who is quite active in pre-snap movement in Kellen Moore. I think the team's going to succeed. The guy who I'm really excited to see through all this is Devontae Smith. I really want to see what he looks like in some of that pre-snap movement. I think that you could argue that there's an opportunity to unlock him, and he's been very good since he's come into the league. I think there's still another level, and I think that there is a chance that you see someone like Kellen Moore unlock that. Now, the thing I want to see about the running backs, and I know I've been dragging on for a little while, this is the last thing I want to say. Talking about seeing what we can get out of DeAndre Swift under Kellen Moore, well, we got to see if DeAndre Swift is still here. I want to see what this running back room looks like after free agency, after the draft. Are they bringing back Swift? Are they bringing back Boston Scott even? Who is going to be here outside of Kenny Gainwell, who's returning? And then who new do they bring in? There's actually a pretty solid free agent class for running backs, and there's a chance to get a pretty juicy comp pick for DeAndre Swift if he lands a big contract elsewhere. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see not only who they bring in, but what types of backs specifically they bring in, to see if they go more of a committee approach or more so that kind of feature back that we've seen Kellen Moore work with at times, the Austin Ecklers, Tony Pollard when he made his rise, and so on. So I think there is definitely some room for excitement there with Kellen.
Yeah, I mean, the MO. Sorry, Eric.
No, go ahead, because all I was going to ask was real quick is Quez is definitely in his last year, right? Like he's a free agent or he's not coming back next year, right?
Yeah, most likely not returning. I mean, there's a chance he still does, but I think probably worn out his welcome here in Philly. But
what if he does? If he does come back, then would he be that motion receiver that all of a sudden?
I don't
think
so.
He's always used for speed. That's the reason why you had him with speed.
But you needed a little more agility, or at least I would like to see a little more agility. That's the kind of the problem with Kez, is that he's kind of all speed, not enough agility. So that's the kind of hindrance in that case.
That was actually a conversation I was having the other day. And it just seems like in the NFL, you really need two elite traits. Like, that's how it works. Is like, there's a lot of guys in college that have that one elite trait. The conversation I was having was about Justice Hill, the running back for the Ravens. I remember doing like the scouting profile when I was looking at him. I was like, this dude is just fast. That's it. And a lot of those dudes that are just fast, Quez Watkins being one of those guys, they tend to not have great careers in the NFL because they don't have that secondary trait that really, cements them and gives them a role. And I think that's unfortunately just what Quez Watkins is lacking. I mean, similar, unfortunately, to guys like Nelson Aguilar, he was fast. Right. And he's smart guy, and I think that's how he's been able to stick a bit. He finally realized that he's also a pretty intelligent football player. But I think that, until you find, I think Zach Pascal's a great example of like, okay, like where are my two attributes? Like I might not be a number one receiver, but really quick and agile and really intelligent, using both of those in tandem. But Zach was talking about DeAndre Swift, and it hasn't been the Eagles' MO as of late, especially to retain running backs. But for some reason, it just feels like DeAndre Swift might be the exception. I don't know. Like, it feels more like a LaShawn McCoy than a Miles Sanders situation. Like, it just feels like, one, I think that DeAndre Swift wants to be in Philly, hometown and all that. But I think too that there seems to be some motivation from the Eagles. I think they know they didn't get the most out of him, and I think Howie Roseman must be licking his chops thinking about what he could potentially do in this offense. You're looking at, like Zach mentioned, the past running backs that Kellen Moore has worked with. Obviously Austin Eckler, kind of a weird season this past year, but I don't think it was the scheme's fault. I think unfortunately the Chargers had some timely injuries that happened when stuff seemed to be kind of turning the corner, and were never able to bounce back. But yeah, I mean, Zach talked about Devontae Smith. I think the other thing is like an actual NFL route tree, which they didn't have last year. And I think that's been the most popular kind of post circulating, is just comparing the difference between Keenan Allen's route tree last year and Devontae Smith's. And there's no reason why Devontae Smith can't be a Keenan Allen type player. Like I hope the Eagles find a way to retain him. This seems like a guy that should be in Philly for his entire career. but there's no reason why he can't be, a 15-year pro the way he plays. Like, obviously, a smaller frame. He's found a way to make that work for him, and he's just tough as nails. I really hope that the Eagles keep him long term, but even if they're not able to, next year should be kind of his statement season. It just seems like all the cards are kind of lining up, all the dominoes are falling into place. But the other thing too that I'd be interested is if they don't retain DeAndre Swift. I'd never really made this connection before, and he's definitely a poor man's version, but Kenny Gainwell has a lot of the same attributes that Austin Eckler has. Maybe not as good hands, maybe not as, fidgety, right? Not able to make as many people miss, but kind of a do-it-all running back, and I think that there's a potential. He did start the season, at the top of the depth chart this year, but how would you guys feel about the Eagles not acquiring a running back? We'll address that quickly. We'll talk about the DC. Obviously, we know a bit more what's going on the defensive side of the ball, and then we'll get into prospects. But how would you feel if, come September, number one running back on the roster is Kenny Gainwell?
Ooh. Well, I say that it would be disappointing. But in the way that I just seen the Eagles utilize their running backs, and I know it's not going to be the same, so I don't know how we'll be. Let's just put it like that. Like, I don't know how we'll be. I don't know if it's going to improve, or there's going to be more carries or whatever, maybe for touches for a running back in the new offense. But if they plan on using running backs and having it featured more, I would hope that it's not Gainwell as your number one. I would much rather see, we go shopping in that free agent market. Um, Maybe trade a pick. I don't know, something like that. See what Howie does. And it could be a guy on a rental. Could be the 1 year guy. Sort of the same sort of thing that we just had with Swift. I mean, that would be fine. I think I'm mostly okay when I hear Gainwell. I think it has to be a complimentary back. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be like so pumped if he was the number one, but I would give it a chance, but I would have my hand on the trigger by saying, hey, week 1, week or after week 2 or week 3, that we should probably have an answer and an addition to that.
Yeah. Again, kind of like Eric, I think it kind of depends. The biggest thing in my mind is we're talking about Kenny Gainwell coming back as number one. Obviously, you're going to need to sign more backs for depth. So, what is the quality of these backs? What's the role that they fulfill? I do understand the connection to like that Austin Eckler light kind of a ability that he has. It's again, the talent level has not been anywhere near there so far, but more so the point is that he's extremely well versatile and he's shown an ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's shown an ability to work as a route runner at times. He can run between the tackles. He can run to the outside. Kind of as opposed to the high level all around player that Austin Eckler was. He's kind of more a jack of all trades, not yet master of any. So I do think possibly in a more feature role with a more capable offensive coordinator, we could see a lot more out of Kenny Gainwell. That being said, if he's your number one coming into the season, I don't feel great, and I need at least another solid back behind him. Go out in free agency and get a Zach Moss, someone like that, to a Gus Edwards and have just another backup, there and run, even if it's not a full committee, someone to split the carry somewhat with him there. I just don't think that he can be your extreme, like just literally just him as your feature back. I don't think you can quite do that yet.
So if you're finding somebody to split that featured back role, let's just say it's Gainwell, whoever that split is, would you rather drop Boston Scott, or would you rather try to keep on to holding on to Penny? Because Penny didn't play at all last year. I imagine his value doesn't really change. If anything, it drops. So
So
I mean, that's probably what a cheap hold on to if as a third.
So Penny, the what I like, again, we don't know what was going on behind the scenes with Penny, and why he wasn't playing, but we got kind of an indication there against the Giants, and the indication seemed to be that he's not good in pass protection. Now, they could find ways like I was fortunate enough to talk to Deuce Staley when he was coaching the Eagles, and he kind of said, I was talking about running backs, and I was like, well, what's your opinion on running backs that aren't good in pass protection? He's like, if they're not good in pass protection, I'm gonna leak them out and have them run a route. And I don't think you want Penny doing that either, right? And so that's the conundrum, is like, what do you do with him on pass downs? And they're bringing in a coordinator who, I mean, I think you need to have a running back in the pass game, right? Like, he's going to pass the ball quite often. If he can't block and he can't run routes, he's a 2-down back. And realistically, if you're running a true committee, you can kind of squeeze him in. But the Eagles just didn't have that going this year. It wasn't a true committee. It was DeAndre Swift and friends, right? And so maybe if they kind of move to that true committee, they can find a way for him. But if you can't pass block and you're not a good receiver, it's hard to use you as a full-time running back.
So do you think they maybe, here's an idea, like you split it 2 featured backs and then you bring in a fullback as a third?
Maybe, right? And I think that's where you could look at a true committee. I think that, I don't know, like the preference in the front office seems to be they want a 1. It might not be a true 1, but like a 1A at least. And yeah, I mean, well, you guys kind of said it. I don't see Kenny Gainwell as a true 1A yet. But yeah, I mean, so kind of using that segue, I was going to talk about prospects and what they were kind of looking in the draft. We skipped over defense. Do want to touch on that really quickly before we get to that. How are you guys feeling about the defense? Obviously, again, schematically, going to be a lot of the same stuff, I think. A lot of the miscommunications, a lot of the rookie mistakes, a lot of the lacking fundamentals should change with a more experienced coach. But the Eagles got their guy, and we had speculations on potentially Wink Martindale, potentially Ron Rivera, or one of these younger coaches getting an opportunity. Saw Minter probably going to the Chargers. So how do you guys feel about? I think we must feel somewhat good about it. Obviously, if you don't like the scheme, you don't like the scheme. But I mean, the Eagles got the guy they wanted last year, who everyone was excited about. Eric makes a great point with personnel. I think we'll talk about that when we talk about prospects and stuff like that. But how are you guys feeling initially? We touched on it a little bit, but it just seems like it's going to be a better defense straight up.
Well, if the scheme, it doesn't seem like in this scheme he's going to blitz, which it's fine. Like he's not going to blitz too much. But if that being the case, we need corners that can play man and press. So if as long as there's like coverage that obviously we didn't have last year, it was the worst in the league. Then there will be a pass rush if there's coverage. I don't, like, all of a sudden. I mean, I have a lot of questions about the secondary. I have a lot of questions from what I saw late in the season. Things like Darius Slay, that kind of. I was definitely irritated by what I saw on the sidelines coming from him. Ever since Patricia came in, he got his surgery, and I don't know if that was like he actually needed to go get the surgery, or if he was like, I'm not playing for Patricia. Like, I don't know how that all went down. I'm not doing anything but speculating because I wasn't in the room. But what I will say is this: if Fangio is somebody that's no nonsense, I also have the question of, are our veterans going to listen to Fangio when he is like the John Tortorella, coordinator? Because I think he'll get the rookies to buy in. I think that'll be fine, but I don't know. I think we have like personalities that might clash with that, and we'll see. Because if anything, and I could be speaking out of place on this, but wasn't that Patricia too? Like, wasn't he like no nonsense and like kind of in everybody's grill about it too? Because then I wonder if the same buttons are going to be pressed there. Um, but as far as scheme is concerned, I think we have the right personnel, right? If he's going to play his scheme a certain way, we can't play off the ball with the corners. We have to have some variation of a press or like a close range. It can't be like sticks all the time. I know it's bend and don't break, and that's what we had, going on this whole season. But to me, I don't know how like I don't know how we can expect anything different out of this defense until we're sitting there going, "Oh, we got a corner that's going to be like, a shutdown corner." Like, I think one of Bradbury or Slay has to go. I'd rather keep Slay and get rid of Bradbury. Um, but if that happens and we got, that pressure on the outside finally, where it's like a good man-to-man and Fangio's defense is working. That right there is going to generate all of our rush, and that's going to be what develops the defensive line. That's huge. That's huge to what this scheme is going to be.
Yeah, you brought up the need to have that solid man presence on the outside, and there's a lot to that. But the one kind of catch-22 of it all in the Vic Fangio defense is like, yes, you need those strong man capabilities at the corner spots on the outside, and that will help. Give the opportunity to create that pressure. But really, those are two different aspects of the game that are constantly feeding off of each other. So under Vic Fangio's defense, I do expect the defensive line to play significantly better and create a lot more pressure, which eases the job on the corners on the outside. But as the corners on the outside are playing better, that gives more time and gives better opportunity for those linemen on the defensive line. So that is the relationship I'm not as worried about. Obviously, James Bradbury is a huge, huge cause for concern. However, Keely Ringo, I think, was really encouraging. There are some young corners on this roster that I do have some hope in. Darius Slay, for all of his personality warts, had a solid year. It's
He
not
did.
as great of a year as he thought it was, but he did have a good year. We can't forget that. So even with the injury, he's had plenty of rest. I think that he's going to be fine coming into the next season, even though he's obviously getting a bit older with every, not getting any younger with any of these games. The big thing for me is you have to figure out the linebacking core. That's the in-between there.
Yes.
You need to have linebackers who can not only cover, but can also help stop the run as well. And the Eagles had neither last season was the big problem. So
They didn't
you're
have
going to
one that
have
could
to
tackle.
overhaul.
Even if they could do that, they didn't have one that could tackle.
Didn't have one that could tackle. I mean, I still have hope for Nakobe Dean. He's got to get healthy. That's again, it's the big red flag he's had since he came out of the draft. But I do have some hope for Nakobe Dean. But you have to address this, I think, in both the draft and free agency. And if the defense can do that, Vic Fangio as a coordinator, I don't have a whole lot of concerns as far as that goes. Yeah, he's a little old fashioned in some ways. This defense kind of needs a little old fashioned. It kind of needs a kick in the ass, frankly, and I think that he's the guy to do it.
The Eagles needed Torts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. One of the other moves on the defensive side of the ball, also to bring in two positional coaches, Carl Scott, who's going to be coaching the DBs, and then I'm going to make sure I get this right, Clint Hunt.
Clint Hurt.
I think they might even replace Big Dom at some point with this
So
guy.
he's a tank.
Yeah,
He's a
we
complete
need
unit.
We need a calendar of Big Dom and Clint
Yeah.
Hurt together,
100%.
because these two guys, and if you listen to Clint Hurt, just the way that he talks to his guys, you couldn't be more excited to have a guy like this in the building. I mean, it cannot be overstated how big of a personality addition this is. But go on, Morgan.
I mean, yeah, big personality edition, big person edition, really. But I think one of the important things is a former DC on the D line now. Again, like I don't think that Rocker was that bad, but just last year, so many times, just D line out of gaps. They weren't really getting the pressure they had hoped. Obviously, kind of a decline towards the end of the year, especially with the young guys. It just seemed like it was time for a change, and you bring in a guy who is stepping in as one of the most experienced D-line coaches in the league at the moment, just in terms of coaching time in the league. Like it's just really impressive what the Eagles have done, but also developed Boye Mafe for the Seahawks, a late first round pick, developed and seeming to be a budding superstar. Like he has a record of developing young guys, and the addition of Carl Scott's really interesting, coming from Alabama, who the Eagles now have a couple of young DBs from Alabama, and Eli Ricks and Josh Jobe. So it's interesting to me too. We talked about potentially bringing in a Georgia DC and how that could ruffle some feathers, and you don't want to cater to all the Georgia guys on the roster. Instead, the Eagles can cater to the Bama guys on the roster. But I think in terms of positional coaches, that's where you get away with it. You want a guy with that relationship, similar to how Brian Johnson was a fantastic QB coach, right, with Jalen Hurts. But then when he moved to OC, there was a bit of a problem and a bit of butting heads in terms of, I think just being friends and having that relationship, it makes it a bit more tough. But I think, for positional coaches, fantastic. He also was with the Vikings before he's with the Seahawks. Less of a proven track record of developing in the NFL, but just hasn't had as much time. Obviously, the Seahawks have a couple of young corners that developed quite well, Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen. He didn't have a hand with Tariq Woolen in his first year, but who knows how much he had to do with Devin Witherspoon. I think that guy was going to be pretty good regardless. But two guys that have a proven track record of developing talent and pushing out talent. I think that not only did the Eagles did a great job of hiring the DC, but are putting great guys around them already. But as Eric mentioned, the linebacker piece is huge. Who knows what they're going to do there? I think that you need to bring in a really good linebacker coach. Obviously, kind of split the role last year of like outside linebackers, middle linebackers, and it just seemed like the whole kind of process was a mess. So they need to cement that. How are you guys feeling about the new positional coaches?
You kind of hit on the head as far as where my excitement is. The fact that, we got a defensive coordinator as our defensive line coach, a former defensive coordinator, I should say, as a defensive line coach. There's a lot of input and experience all of a sudden when we just went through a whole season of wasted potential. And with because of no experience, like it's kind of how it felt towards the end. Like I think all of us here can sit there and say that this team should have been better than what it was had it been in the right hands. And I think this time around, I don't know how much better immediately it's going to be, but I know it's at least in better hands. And I feel that with including the position coaches as well. My big thing is development, and just seeing what happens with that the whole defense, secondary, including the safeties and the linebackers. I have a lot of faith that this will be a good bounce back year for our defensive line. I refuse to believe that collection of talent is only that effective. So, I mean, as long as they don't, put Hassan Reddick into coverage, then, this Eagles defense next year can all of a sudden be
Did
back
you see
in
his
business.
quote from today?
No, I didn't. What was
he said? I don't like to see my players going backwards.
Well, that's good. I'm happy.
Yeah.
So
Gotta
back
love
confirmed.
that, right? Gotta
Bounce
love
back
that.
confirmed.
Yeah, no, I think that so far so good effectively at the positional coaches. I think there's a lot to be excited about with both guys, but I mean, for me, as someone who has always had an appreciation specifically for the defensive line, I mean, having Clinton Hurt, I couldn't be more excited, especially when you have two young guys like Jalen Carter, like Jordan Davis on that line. And let's not forget about guys like Milton Williams and like this is a complete unit for Philadelphia that still has a lot of young talent. And I think there's a lot of real good that Clint Hurt could do. And you mentioned linebackers and the importance of bringing in a linebacking coach. So there's one guy out there who there's been a lot of smoke about, possibly coming to Philadelphia. He's been holding out hope for a defensive coordinator spot, interviewed with the Bills, Mike Caldwell. Bills hired somebody from within. Mike Caldwell's still out there. Those positions are drying up, and could be a pretty good spot for him to come on in and be that linebackers coach. If you can complete your, the 3-level hiring process there as far as your positional coaches with Mike Caldwell, I think that's an easy A+. Like, I don't know how you could really do any better positionally speaking. And to have that with Vic Fangio, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of excitement on the coaching staff right now. Really, all you need to do is make sure that you add the personnel needed at the areas of opportunity, which again, that's adding a corner, probably some edge depth, definitely some linebackers, and please let's get a safety in here. Sidney Brown was great before the tear. I think he's going to be great for a long time going forward for the Eagles. I think that Reed Blankenship's been fantastic, definitely exceeded expectations from when they brought him in. I think it was from the Colts. Is that right? But all that being said, I'm not too sure how much longer Kevin Byard is going to be here. It'd be great to bring in a veteran who can really help contribute from day one.
Yeah, I mean it's a great kind of segue into. I mean, we got a question in the chat real quick. I'll just who would be cheaper to get, PS2 or Jair Alexander? Jair Alexander seems to have talked his way out of Green Bay, so I think right now his price is a little lower. PS2, unfortunately, just injuries, but I think that Denver wants to keep him around. I think Jair. I mean, you never know. I'd love to see him in a different color green. But
just real quick, Blankenship was a undrafted free agent. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a great segue, Zach, because I feel like that's the biggest stress. When you talk about a Vic Fangio defense, loves to disguise coverage, right? We'll play zone in so many different ways, give the quarterbacks different looks, just to simulate pressure. Again, not blitzing much, so you have to simulate pressure some way, shape, or form, and so puts a lot of stress on his safeties. And you have two young safeties who, like you mentioned, had a really good start to their career, but it's a big ask, right? And you look kind of anywhere Vic Fangio has gone, even just talking about last year, right, was pretty fortunate with Javon Holland, Canadian, by the way, but has been pretty fortunate throughout his career. I think that's when we're talking about personnel. If you're starting a Vic Fangio defense outside of the defensive line, which has to be pretty terrific, is safeties. You need good safeties to play in this defense. Again, the Eagles have two very good young safeties, but and also versatile, right? I think that's the other thing too, is like both could play either close to line of scrimmage or farther away, but definitely some holes on this defense and on the offense. So we're going to transition kind of to talking about, with the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl this week, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about prospects. One of the guys that's been coming up for me is, man, I might butcher the name. I'm going to try not to, but Quinyon Mitchell. The Eagles talked to him, but a corner, man, a man cover corner, apparently has been playing pretty fantastic at the Senior Bowl this week. The Eagles have already spoken to him. Again, we're not, a huge draft podcast. We'll talk about it, but realistically want to get into the conversation of what do you think the Eagles will be looking for at this time around. You know that Howie loves to scout at these Shrine games, at the Senior Bowl. Usually they end up picking at least one player from one of these games. What positions do you think the Eagles could look to address in the draft, and what do you think they're scouting for? Obviously, most likely, these guys aren't going to be first-round picks. Some of them absolutely, but for the most part, you're at these to kind of find those mid-round to late-round hidden gems. Where do you feel like the Eagles could add someone, or where do you think they'd be looking?
Middle linebacker, like directly, and I don't have any names, but it's just going by team needs and what they should be looking for. So without a shadow of a doubt, middle linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, I think linebacker. I would say linebacker, period, because there's depth that's going to be needed on the edge as well. There's kind of depth needed almost anywhere. I mean, a guy like Miles Murphy out of North Carolina is an exciting physical prospect, but one guy who kind of sticks out to me, really, as far as this is a position that I think we've talked about sometimes about the Eagles looking to add to, but Jatavion Sanders, I think, is someone who is definitely going to be on the watch list, or should be on the watch list for the Eagles, because we're getting close to that period where they tend to draft a strong developmental tight end. We've had developmental tight ends, Jack Stoll, Grant Calcaterra, and they've seen consistent improvement and they've progressed well. But you need the guy who's going to take the mantle from Dallas Goedert when that time comes up. And I don't think either of those guys is going to have it covered. Jatavion Sanders is that guy. He's one of the, if not the best receiving tight end in this entire draft. He's somebody who's going to be likely available around where they pick in the second round. I think more than likely they may not go tight end with their first pick in the second round, but with their second pick, you're already going to have a pick in the first and the second round by then. I think Jatavion Sanders is definitely somebody they could target. They build through the trenches. That's something that we've seen every year. There's not – people would argue there's not an immediate need on the offensive line because, you look at what they're expected to do if Jason Kelce truly is retired, and you're moving Cam Jurgens to center, and then you're bringing over Tyler Steen to guard, where he played very well last season. So on that end, you don't have a whole lot to be worried about. how much longer is Lane Johnson going to be a Philadelphia Eagle? That's kind of the question there. Do they go draft a developmental right tackle? Possibly it's not the sexy pick, but you never quite know. But if they're drafting for immediate need, I do think that a guy like a Jatavion Sanders could fill not only a role this season, but in years going forward. And really, other than that, of course, like Eric said, linebacker, and I mean, Morgan said it perfectly. Safety is still kind of a need. I think they might go veteran for safety. They like the corners that they have, the young corners that they have, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to go with a quote unquote more talented young corner, or at least projected to be more talented. But I would definitely say that there's a lot of room for possibility. But for me, a tight end is someone I'd like to see them get.
What's the possibility that Kevin Byard stays in Philly?
If he's willing to drastically restructure his contract, which I'm not sure that he would be willing to do, that's the only situation I see that happening. Because I think it's something like $14 million that they save by cutting him. It's some.
Yeah,
it's a very easy decision of a number, basically,
right? Yeah,
to move on from him. So if he's willing to restructure, and you never know, AJ Brown's still here. Maybe he decides, he does want to stick in Philly. Opportunity to win, definitely opportunity to get plenty of playing time, maybe. But he'd have to severely restructure that contract for that to happen.
Would you think that's like a safety? Like only safety, if just again, like even a young safety again, and maybe in the second round, not in the first, but maybe that first pick or in a second round would be a smart idea, because I'm starting to think that is then.
I mean, depending
You
on
can't
who's
you can't
available,
really rely on so my thing is like this with Brown, he got hurt last year, so you're like, okay, this is this guy who missed a year of development, so it's more so a position battle on a pick, and you do need the help there anyway, so let's go for it.
Yeah, so
that's kind of the way
you can't thumb your nose at talent at the position, obviously. And if you find the right guy, I mean, when's the last time they drafted a safety in the first round? That's kind of the one thing. If they trade down from that first round pick or possibly up in the second round, a couple guys that obviously a lot of people like, Cameron Kitchens and Tyler Nubbin as well.
Exactly my
guy. Those are two guys who, you could definitely look at them and say, I can make this guy, if I can get this guy in the top 40, yeah, maybe I go ahead and I pull the trigger on that. And this is somebody who, because Blankenship, I love the guy. He does get, beat up a little bit throughout the season. So it's something that it's not really a concern quite yet, but it is on the mind, So if you have a guy who's so gifted, like one of those two prospects, and you're at a position in the draft where you're like, I can justify making this pick here, definitely.
Well, it's kind of taking me back to the Jim Schwartz days when that third safety position was a really important position on this team, right? Like they went to those nickel and dime looks quite often. And unfortunately, it just seems like Avonte Maddox just can't stay on the field for you. And I like talent wise and effort wise, like he's definitely given his all for Philly. And we love him. And I think like when he's on the field, you can't really ask for a better slot corner. In terms of safety, it leads a little bit to desire. But as your third guy, like I just feel like he would be perfect, but just can't stay on the field. And obviously, when you have two young guys that unfortunately, missed time already, you don't want your third option to be another guy who might have injury problems. I think people, I think one of the things you brought up, Eric, is like that second round is going to be really interesting for the Eagles, because I think you can use that to address both the offense and the defense. And I think it's going to kind of swing the pendulum of what Howie and that front office thinks they need more help on. And so I think that's going to be really interesting, because I think, obviously the trenches are always on the table. Like we can always select a D lineman or an offensive lineman. Interestingly enough, like one of the guys that I feel like fits that mold is a center, right? The Oregon center, PJP, Powers Johnson. I think that he like there's a couple prospects on the offensive line, but I think that if you get a center, right, and you can just plug him in right away and keep Juergens where he's at, and keep Dickerson. Obviously, I feel like Dickerson's going to stay where he's at this point, but a realistic option there. So I think like again, you can address the second round in a lot of ways. I think the Eagles are still in a position where you just draft the best player available in the first round. But it'll be really interesting to see. And so I'm curious, what and as the draft unfolds and the process unfolds, what we see the Eagles, we always get a good indication by the visits. Of like last year, it was all like a ton of defensive backs. And it's like, okay, well, we kind of see where they're leaning. Probably could be the same this year. Like I assume if you're not going best player available, you're looking at a corner. Like I feel like in first round, that's a very Eagles pick to look at a corner. But I mean, I think people underestimate and forget how much Sidney Brown was wanted in Philly during the draft process last year. And as much as easy as it is to kind of go, okay, who knows what this guy's going to be. He's the perfect fit for this defense if he can stay on the field. He's a bit undersized. Granted, that guy plays like he's 6'5", right? So you don't care about that so much. So I feel really confident about the safeties, but I'm wondering, we'll kind of give the last thoughts on the draft process of, first, second, third round kind of deal. What would be kind of your ideal in terms of positional picks? Like, where do you want to see the Eagles address come, draft time?
I will go. This is a little bit tough. I would say so. I would go corner probably with in the second round. Dang man, yeah, corner in the second round. I would say first round. I would probably stick with the trenches. So do something with the offensive line there. Probably address whatever it's going to be. So you have depth for Lane. And the third, you said, man, I'm taking best available linebacker, like straight up. Like I think you have to start investing somewhere where in the third round, if you could find a guy that would be maybe a projected 2, or something that's like a steal because of frame size or whatever. Yeah, then that's what you got to do. And I think that maybe with I do like that right there. With maybe with some of these new coach hires that you could probably take a linebacker in the third, and they play better than what third round would be labeled as. Also, I
Yeah.
just know that to confirm what I do know, that somebody is going to take a USC quarterback, and I'm going to be laughing. So go ahead.
Yeah, there's again a lot of position of opportunity. I think that's kind of one thing that we have discussed ad nauseum. For me, there's a lot of first round corner talent, and I agree with Eric. I do think targeting a corner in the first round is definitely something that could benefit this team. In that second round, we've talked about the need for a linebacker. A guy like Edgerrin Cooper, if he's available there, would be fantastic. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., obviously, as well. I do like Cooper a bit better, but either of those guys, I'd be very happy to get him in the second round. And again, that tight end spot, I do think is something you could look at in the second or third round. When you look past Sanders and you're looking at some of the other potential tight end prospects, Cade Stover out of Ohio State is a fine third round prospect. So there's opportunity there, second or third round. And then if you do go, let's say you go corner, linebacker, tight end. If I'm making that pick in the third round, I think I'm grabbing a wide receiver because I'd like to get some young depth on this team as well at the wideout spot.
Yeah, it'd be interesting how the receivers shape out. I think, I don't see the Eagles looking outside of corner in the first round that heavily. Like it just feels like this is the year. They didn't address it last year. James Bradbury, I mean, better be gone at this point. What else does he need to show? And the young guys, as good as they are, right? You never know how long Darius Slay is going to be in Philly too, right? So you have potentially one of those guys. I know that you probably shift, Rick's full-time into the slot potentially. Job could be that guy as well. You have a lot of options here, but I don't know if you really have that standout that kind of leads the new age of corners in Philly. I think that this seems to be the year to do that. But the other position, if they don't go that route, I could see them finding a receiver in the first round. Again, like I don't know what the AJ Brown situation is. I think a lot of it's overblown, like, oh, he's going to be traded away. But, his time in Philly might be shorter than we hope. He might, want it out,
or it might be a financial decision.
100%, right? Like we're not sure. And the Eagles have gone so long with well, not, I mean, 2 years, but realistically, like this offense is kind of based around having two really good receivers at the moment. And so I think Howie Roseman's seen how good that works for this team. And I think that there's some kind of dedication there to maintain that. And I mean, we had it in the chat as well. Like wide receiver 3 needs to be addressed. You just saw it hurt the Eagles so much late in the season. And as they tried to, make a push into the playoffs, like you just need that third option. And for some reason they couldn't get Dallas Goedert going. That seemed to be the right choice, but maybe there's more to that than we thought. But you need a third option, and maybe you're getting out of the backfield, but whatever it is, kind of need to address that. But I think that, you have to address linebacker. I think you both hit the nail on the head. Can you do that in the third round? That's kind of been their MO. There's been so much linebacker talent in the second round that's panned out over the last couple of years. I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot. But hey, if you can get a third rounder, I think that's fantastic. And then I would just say, like, who knows if Fletcher Cox is going to be around. I think Milton Williams is super underrated. Zach brought him up earlier. Like, you just can't ask for a better kind of, curve of production. Like, he's just kept getting better and better and better. You have Josh Sweat, and then you have the the 3 Georgia guys, but that's, you don't know for how long you're going to have any veteran presence. So I could see them addressing the defensive line. Again, the offensive line been mentioned, but I think the second and third round will be really interesting for the Eagles. Obviously, we'll talk about this more in upcoming weeks. Any final thoughts, fellas, before we end the pod?
Can I actually put you on the spot real quick, Morgan, as far as the corners in this draft go? And I'll give a name too, so I'm not just going to leave you on an island. But
for sure.
we'll talk more about this as we get closer to the draft. Obviously, there are so many corners that could potentially go in this first round. Do you have any corner crushes on any of these guys you think might be there for the Eagles pick at 22?
Not yet. Like, I think that the biggest thing that I always find is the closer you get to the draft actually happening, I mean, you see the corner seem to one of the most volatile positions in terms of, like, you have the number 1 guy and then you have the rest. And if the Eagles are picking top 10, absolutely. Like, I think you get the bona fide corner, but I'm interested in doing a bit more research on, like, the bottom of the first, early second. I think that there's kind of going to be a sweet spot. Like, we saw Joey Porter Jr. last year, like a guy like that, like, I think, but I'd be interested to see. I think there's like a kind of a split between what the Eagles usually covet and DB prospects and what fits the Vic Fangio defense. A lot of zone. You want a longer guy. You look at the Seattle corners. I think that for a while, Howie Roseman's been kind of jealous of what Seattle's got going on, brought in 2 Seattle coaches. So I'd be interested to see what he wants. Cause I mean, for me last year, it was Deonte Banks was my crush. And, like, again, like a long, talented receiver. I feel like there has to be one of those guys in the draft where, like, we didn't hear about Deonte Banks until like 2 weeks before the draft process. And, like, he was, a 3rd, 4th round pick. And then all of a sudden Giants pick him. He was either bottom of the first or no, he actually was the first round, mid first round. So I think there's one of those guys, and I think the Eagles will cover them. But yeah, unfortunately, I think we're all in the same boat. Like, just started our draft research. So we'll have more names for you as the process gets going. But thank you for those that joined us. Obviously keep tuning in. We'll have coverage after the Senior Bowl and East West Shrine wraps up. I'm sure we'll have some names for you to watch. And we'll talk more as the Eagles, hire positional coaches. We thought it'd be a half an hour, but there's a lot to talk about, man. So it was flowing today. We let it run. So thanks for sticking around. With that being said, I think, it's time for me to do Brian's thing and say, thanks for coming. Do I say go Birds or you guys say go Birds?
Go Birds! Perfect.
Thank you for sticking around, and let's see if I can get the outro right.
It's a great face.